All right, so it sounds like that's the bell. And if you are here to hear a talk about building and leading inclusive teams in a hybrid and evolving world, you are in the right place. I am Chris Clay. You can find me at Chris Clay Plays on Twitter, also on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you've got any additional questions after the talk or in the following days something comes up you want to chat about. Always happy to talk shop. I am the game director of Gods Unchained at the Immutable Game Studios. And just a little bit about myself, I've been making games now for about 23 years. I got my start in technical art before technical art was actually a recognized field way, way, way back in the day. Started with basically alias wavefront Maya and bringing that into game development. Back then, Lightwave was the tool of choice. From there, I moved into art direction for a time, then over into game systems design, and throughout my career, I've sort of dabbled in both production and PM as well. My coding days were mostly in the tech art days, and I've kind of left those all behind. As a game director, the way I like to describe myself is I can do a little bit of everything, and I can speak everyone's language. So when it comes to bringing it all together, that's where my strengths lie. So a little bit of an overview for the session today. We're going to go into respect, inclusivity, trusting your team but verifying what's going on, communication, connection, talent retention, and then if I go quickly enough, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And essentially, if you can walk away from this talk having learned one thing, I'm going to consider that a success and be happy with it. Okay, respect. We'll start with a definition. Due regard for the feelings, wishes, or rights of others. So as a longtime game veteran, unfortunately, I've worked primarily in environments where respect was not a given. Often where respect fell is you must respect my authority for me to respect you as a person. And ultimately what led me from the United States over here to Australia was a search for a company where I could have a baseline agreement with the executive staff that everyone has to treat everyone with respect. And that seems really simple and easy. Like, of course, we want to be humans, we want to be kind, but it just doesn't happen because exceptions always come to the fore. And that's the experience I've had throughout my career. Exceptions happen. We've got somebody who's an amazing graphics programmer, and guess what? Total asshole. Makes everyone's life miserable. But they've got this great skill set, so of course we have to deal with it. And my answer to that is, if you've got somebody like that, you do want to work with them, hopefully, to improve their communication style, to bring them along. But ultimately, if they cannot change, they are not worth having in your business. Because the damage that they do to the team, to those around them, to your ability to keep people engaged and happy is immense. And I believe it is always a mistake to keep those people around. In my time at Immutable, I joined when we were about 15 people. We're close to about 300 now. We have had to let go a few people because they couldn't change and adapt. And I know I don't regret any of those decisions. They're always hard, particularly when they have very unique skill sets. But afterwards, after you go through the work, you get there, you often feel this immense just sigh of relief in the team of not having to deal with that person anymore. And you can start making those connections again. But if you have brilliant jerks, work with them. But with them on the team, you're never going to get to that place of overall psychological safety. I know there's a talk tomorrow to sort of deep dive on psychological safety, but this is something that's really quite important to me. And as a leader, how I can help on that front with psychological safety is to be vulnerable myself and allow myself to be challenged, allow myself to be questioned. I think the last time that really stands out for me is a couple of months ago. I was on a call with about 100 people on it and talking about where we're at, what we need to get done, and I used the term manpower. I'm like, we just don't have enough manpower to do everything we want. All of a sudden, associate producer goes off mic. It's like, Clay, people power, be better. Like, look, didn't do it intentionally, but I really appreciate the challenge. So what I do in that situation is like, thank you for the call out, and I can work to change my language. Doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to get it right, because that's kind of deeply ingrained, but I can work and continue to improve that. And as a leader, if I can take that feedback, if I can have people call me out and be better, it makes it more safe for everyone else to call out people to be better. And that adds up over time. And those little tiny nudges are in many ways more important sometimes than the sweeping changes. Because if they can do that on the micro, then in the macro, when they're having a real problem, they also feel comfortable to come and talk to you about it. That creates an overall level of psychological safety in the team. And when people feel safe, they can be more creative, they can be more productive. So there's a little bit of selfishness in it too. It's not just for everyone to be kumbaya and happy, but it actually helps the business on the whole. On that note, fight or flight is the thing that we typically hear. There's also freeze and fawn, and these are the ones that we don't necessarily hear as much. And in creating an environment of respect and inclusivity, the freeze and fawn are two of the things that stand out for me. Particularly freeze. So when you're talking about people who aren't necessarily autistic, they're people who are a little bit more neurodivergent, particularly in interviews, there's a very strong chance that they're going to freeze. I've seen this time and time again, particularly when they're talking to me. I don't know quite why. I try to be very personable and friendly, but I've got a long career in the games business, and sometimes people are intimidated. And when that happens, you've got a choice. In many cases, it's like, okay, this person clearly isn't capable. Let's shut down the call. Let's end it. The other part about it is you can actually acknowledge it, create a safe space for them, bring them out of it. And often, if you can take that little bit of extra energy and time to bring in that psychological safety, you can get them talking again, and you can find people who are really just wonderful people, incredibly productive employees that otherwise you might not have missed on. Fawning is my problem. So when I've dealt with my narcissistic abusers in the past in the workplace, this is my response to it. I'm trying to make them happy. I'm trying to do everything I can to please them, and it's exhausting. A lot of my burnout comes from this response. And it's also important to recognize that in your employees, because that takes time, energy, and effort, and it will add up. When you're dealing with brilliant jerks, you want to try and coach them. This is hard because people don't want to be the bad guy. When you're coaching somebody about their behavior, you do want to go in with some radical candor and let them know what the problem is, how you see it, what impact it's causing, and then how they can start addressing it. And I guarantee that this is going to cause cognitive dissonance in this person, because we all see ourselves as heroes in our own story, even those of us with imposter syndrome. But you need to work to create this space where they can have the cognitive dissonance and hopefully overcome it. And if they can't, unfortunately, again, this leads to an exit from the company ultimately. But acknowledging that cognitive dissonance in the moment can also help. It's probably the most challenging part of change, though, because ultimately a lot of people cannot fight through it. The last part in all of this is cumulatively, if you've set up a culture over time with psychological safety, with the ability for people to speak out, where you adapt, you get to a place that I like to call the tyranny of the meek. And I probably need to talk to marketing about better branding on this, because it kind of sounds negative. But what it is me as an individual at this point, I cannot monitor a company of 300 people. I cannot be there in all the interactions. I can't continue to ensure that it is safe. But what I can build is the tyranny of the meek, where everyone feels empowered to call out the little things to each other, to others, and know that if they call them out, they're not going to get in trouble for it. Ideally, they're going to get celebrated for it. And what you get is everyone wants to keep that around. Everyone is fighting to keep that environment in place. And that tyranny of the meek is how you continue it. When you don't have this, when you don't get rid of the brilliant jerks, this is why time and time again in the industry, with larger companies, we always see it go wrong. Nobody wants that environment, but instead of having little steps in place to keep it going right, it goes down a path of, well, Mike got away with it, so why can't I? Sally got away with it, so why can't I? And it slowly degenerates over time to a critical breaking point where people won't accept it anymore. So do the work early, do the work often, reinforce the environment, and you'll get into a good space. 2 key resources that I love, Crucial Conversations. This one was a bit transformative for me because I used to want to be right, desperately wanted to be right. And if I was right, I didn't care what damage I caused. If you don't read the book, you don't take anything else away. What I really learned from this is if you're going into an argument to be right, don't. That is not a good outcome. It will not lead to good outcomes. Go into an argument knowing how you want the outcome to be. Like, I want to create psychological safety for my team. This is a good outcome. Let's go have an argument about that. If you're going in it to be right, don't. Radical Candor, another book I absolutely love. My problem on the path of radical candor is I have ruinous empathy. I don't want to go have hard conversations with people because I know I'm going to hurt their feelings. I know I'm going to cause cognitive dissonance. I might make them mad at me. I don't want that. But if I take the time for radical candor and I go and acknowledge problems people are having in the moment, shortly after, and continuously, it leads to really good outcomes. And that's actually far kinder than not wanting to have those conversations, because it gives people an opportunity to change. If you don't take the time for that radical candor, what's going to happen is it's going to continue to decline to the point where the only outcome is a bad outcome. They're going to have to leave the company, they're going to have to get demoted, they're going to have to get fired, they're going to have to get transferred. Something bad is going to happen. So my key takeaway from that book, have those difficult conversations, know what you want to get out of it, and good things will come. Sorry, 1 sec for water. Inclusivity. So another definition. Allowing and accommodating people who have historically been excluded. So I know it gets thrown around a lot, but talking a little bit about privilege. So me, 6'5", white, heterosexual male, I have a lot of privilege. I've got a wonderful accent from America. It has carried me throughout my career. People default to me as a leader because I am very tall. My life has been on easy mode in many ways. And privilege is knowing that if I F up, that my privilege will protect me. One of the challenges I find with privilege is we often talk about equality and privilege, where we're going to try and create an equal environment. And in my experience with privilege, going for equality doesn't work. It just doesn't. It flat out fails time and time again. If you want to overcome privilege, you need to go for equity. And equity is not fair, and it makes people mad. This is where I get down to the gamification and placing your fingers on the scale. So one of the most effective ways that we ever tipped the scales on inclusiveness is making things unfair. It's going to my hiring managers and being like, all right, you're hiring for this role, great. If you are able to hire somebody from a diverse background, you can spend 10% more on the role. It's easy, and it's not fair. But what that means is in that gamified mind, like we want the best people out there, I've got more money to spend. I'm going to take a little bit more time, and hiring diversity takes more time. And I'm going to go look for those really good people. The other side of it is representation matters. And sometimes this is sort of cursory. It's people, a diverse nature included on your website. But I think it also channels through the game as a whole. Ultimately, for me, the question with my game, Gods Unchained, is can everybody find a character that they can identify with? And I'm not there yet. We still got work to do. But we're a long way down that path. And in many ways, that's the start of it. Can they find themselves in your game? Is there a place for them in the company? And if there's not, it makes it a lot harder to overcome those initial filters and breaking through to even apply. We're really good at self-censoring when we don't feel there's a place for us to belong. And the last part about it, and one of the most challenging for me, is challenging assumptions. Our brains are logic engines. They're built to discard information. They're built to go down hardwired paths. Taking time to step back and challenge your own assumptions, to challenge the assumptions of those around you, again, can be difficult because it's going to lead to cognitive dissonance in many places. It's being willing to get called out when you're making a decision that isn't in everyone's best interest in inclusivity, and it's calling other people's out. Not always fun, but effective. Couple of the parts on inclusivity. So how many people in the room have imposter syndrome? Yeah, so pretty common. Fairly destructive for people. Also creates people who are really, really good at what they do without recognizing it. with imposter syndrome, it is so common that it's something you do need to address because it's exhausting. That continual anxiety of, like, people are going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about, like, that people don't know what I'm doing, it adds up over time. So some of these other things, like recognizing people as they want to be recognized. So one of the defaults is, hey, we've got HR, we've got systems in place. We're going to recognize people, on public Slack channels, at company meetings. Not everyone wants to be recognized publicly. Some people want to be recognized privately, in a one-on-one session. Some people just want an email, something they can have that's solid and persistent. Some just want it verbally. Talk to the people on your team and ask how they want to be recognized. This can also help with imposter syndrome. Some people, like myself, kind of need constant streams of reinforcement because of it. Like, yes, things are going good. Yes, you're doing a good job. Those little things help a ton. One of the challenging things for me as a problem solver is this next one, knowing when to listen, when to support, and when to champion. It really wasn't until a couple of years ago that in my one-on-ones with my reports, or in people that I'm leading that don't directly report to me, that I started changing my behavior here. If people came to me with a problem, I was going to champion and solve it. One, this burns me out, because when you've got a team of 60 plus people, there's a whole lot of problems to go around. So it wasn't sustainable for me, and it wasn't making people happy. So just asking the very simple question of, hey, I hear your problem, I acknowledge it. What do you want me to do here? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to give you tips on how you can solve it yourself? Do you need me to go and solve this for you? So powerful. And so many times I just have people go, no, I just wanted to vent. Thank you for listening. And I'm like, whew, okay, I can put that off my plate. Also something to raise if it keeps coming up over time. Respect as a foundation, I think, also amplifies inclusivity. I know I've found at Immutable, with the baseline of respect to carry us through, we've had far more inclusive hires across both the Immutable Studio and the platform side of things. And I think we've done a really good job of not falling into some of the classic traps where, great, it's really easy to hire women into HR, so we're going to balance our books and our numbers by filling up HR with women. My fight when that was happening was, all right, we need to stop this. We need to hire some men into the HR department because it's completely unbalanced. Like, yes, I know that it helps our overall numbers with the big data, but if we're going down this path, we're not really solving the problem. You need to take that extra time to go hire your women engineers. You need to go hire diverse characters across race and gender, and that takes time. The other thing that I've found, also a little bit selfishly, is people who come from diverse backgrounds, particularly who have been in the industry a while, are beyond amazing, because they have had to deal with so much bullshit to get to where they're at, and it's been so much harder. And if you can bring those people into an environment where they're psychologically safe, they can truly shine. It's probably one of the things I'm most proud about in my role, to be able to help do this for people. The last thing is expanding your search. So this one is hard, but when you're trying to hire diverse teams, you're not necessarily going to find them in the traditional ways, where they've shipped X mobile titles, or they've launched these console projects. Sometimes you have to look in different bins if you're going to build out the diversity. One of my most recent hires that I'm really quite proud of, I actually hired out of wedding videography as an associate producer, essentially helping me on all of our outsourcing on the project. It's been absolutely fantastic. And some of it was looking at those core skills, like organization, the ability to reach out to vendors, really strong communication, really great organization across emails, across multiple people. And they had all those skills. Not necessarily somebody who traditionally would make that jump into games, has a gaming background. Let's give it a try, and oh my gosh, it works. All right, neurodivergence. So this is gobbledygook mess for most of you, I imagine, but I wanted to bring it up because this one is very meaningful to me, in that we can talk about autism, we can talk about ADHD, we can talk about gifted, and many people in the room have probably fallen into one of these buckets in time. And there's a lot of overlap between all of them. And man, each side has different ways that you need to adapt. There's been some really good talks at GCAP so far, really good panel earlier yesterday on the topic. Some of it is, again, adapting interview style based off of how the people are communicating with you and making some adaptations for where they're at. One of the common scenarios that I've seen, particularly with people with imposter syndrome, is as they're in that interview, they are judging themselves incredibly harshly. Like, I'm sitting there on the other side, I'm like, oh, they're doing great, they're going fine. I've had people literally break down and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I answered the question like that. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? And this is where radical candor I found is very helpful in breaking them out of their own cycles. It's taking a moment to stop and being like, hey, I see you right now, and I see you judging yourself really harshly. I want you to acknowledge that you are judging yourself right now way harder than I am. Can you mirror that back to me? Did you hear it? Okay. Can we acknowledge that? Yes? Okay, we got that. Do you need to take a minute? Do we just need to pause and reset? Having just that little bit of extra empathy, taking that little bit of extra time, can make a big difference in somebody's ability to be themselves. And I don't have time to go into it too much, and just part of it is masking. You know, for people in all phases of this, giftedness, ADHD, autism, at some point we're masking, and we're trying to pretend we are normal humans getting through our days, and it's exhausting. And being somebody who the person that you're interviewing with can take that mask off a little bit, be their true self. One, as a hiring manager, you get the real person, and that can be really useful to know if they're going to fit in and succeed in the company. But again, it also creates that psychological safety, and sometimes that's being vulnerable yourself. So it's empathizing with the feelings that they're having, telling a story about where you've been in a similar situation and it was okay. Body doubling to aid executive function. So I know I originally encountered this as paired programming, but I think ultimately paired programming is, in many cases, body doubling. And for those of you who don't know what that means, essentially for people with executive dysfunction, this is often people with ADHD or autism, having another person there, even if they're not doing anything, even if they're just looking over your shoulder, can make the task so much easier. This is something that I use in many cases where if I'm having trouble getting started on something, I'll go grab somebody and I'm like, hey, I need you to hop on a call, let's join this doc, I need you for 5 minutes. And in many cases, just reaching out to let them know helps me get started. I'm going through the doc, they're there for a little bit, task is done. But for anybody that you have on your teams who, they seem brilliant. When they deliver work, it's fantastic. They're often late. They're coming through and they're procrastinating. Body doubling could be a great technique of just pairing them with another person for a little bit of time. And for many of the people who are neurodiverse, they move really, really quickly once they get moving, once the hyperfocus starts. Great way to get them going. The other one that's really important for me is object impermanence. And this is going to come through when we talk a little bit about trust but verify. So unfortunately, in a hybrid world, I don't see everybody at the office every day. I ultimately don't care about butts and seats. I just want the work to get done. The challenge for me is when I don't see those people, they don't really exist. And it's not that I don't care about them, it's just my brain forgets. Object impermanence is a very real thing. We need techniques to help us handle this. This is where we come to the power of clarity and accountability, processes in place to help remind people that these things exist and carry them along. People who are neurodiverse are also far more likely to burn out. Pretending to be a real human all the time is exhausting. If they don't have good coping mechanisms, if they don't know how they regenerate, this is going to be a consistent problem. This has been a problem for most of my career for me. Ultimately, I had to learn that I have to run at least 3 or 4 times a week, and there is no option otherwise. Woke up this morning very early, ran down the Yarra River, because I have to. If I don't do that, I will not have enough dopamine in my system. Helping teach other people the techniques to avoid burnout Giving them space too. Like, yes, if you're crammed in meetings all day, as a neurodiverse person, that could be completely exhausting. Find the place where they excel, find their zone of genius. And this last part, focus time and do not disturb. The other thing that is crazy with our modern world, particularly as we're remote, is systems like Slack. It can call for your attention all the fricking time. And there is an expectation that you're going to be there to respond. You're online. I sent you a message. Where's my response? We do need to learn to respect focus time. I know I schedule it out on my calendar, and when I am in focus time, do not expect a response. And giving people that space to basically be like, yes, when I'm in focus time, I can detach, I can just focus in, super important. Okay, how are we doing on time? Pretty good. Trust, firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something, but verify. And oh man, was this a lesson for me as we went remote during lockdown. I don't know if anyone else struggled through lockdown, but that was a whole lot of firsts for me in leading large teams remotely. A key feature for me with teams is imparting trust. It is empowering. I do not like to micromanage. I like to align people on where we're going and let them go do their thing. There to support. If you need me, come reach out to me. I'll be there for you. Go get your stuff done. In a remote world, where I don't necessarily see everyone every day, people were out of sight and out of mind. I saw my leaders quite regularly in my team meetings. I got reports from them in my one-on-ones. I got reports from them in my ops meetings on how everything was going. But I didn't really have the picture I would normally have of the team as a whole. And things that I didn't realize I had to use as a crutch are just reading people. Faces are incredible fonts of information for me. If I'm walking through the kitchen and I see somebody's face and they're distressed, bam, I can anchor onto that, I can have a conversation with them, and I can find out a problem that I didn't know even existed, just from facial information. Listening in on, like, as much as I hate open floor plans, listening in on the thousands of conversations that are happening and seeing where things are going wrong, can't do that in a remote world. So how do we get there instead? One of the things that I've found is the most useful tool in this is setting up skip-level meetings. So this is sort of enforced connection to people that I wouldn't necessarily be in meetings with day to day, and it helps verify the chain of information. So some of what happened during lockdown for me is I was hearing one thing from some of my direct managers. They were hearing me communicating something completely different to the reports, and the reports were saying completely different things. And it wasn't until I did my first skip-level meetings that I was like, oh wow, we have got some problems here that we're gonna need to sort through. So if you haven't done skip-level meetings, gather up the reports of your reports. You can do these one-on-one if you've got time and not that many. You can do them in group sessions as well. You can do them through email if you must. Some combination of these can be useful just because not everyone is willing to speak up in a group setting in particular. The other thing was office hours. So with office hours, this is opening up parts of my calendar where people can schedule in. I've modified this since I originally implemented it because most people will opt out of joining office hours even if they have a problem to, if I've got open slots in my office hours, I'll pull people into them. Have a half-hour chat, can find out a ton of information just through that. The last part, in this sort of remote world, the challenge of follow-up and follow-through. So you may hear the problems, you may be working on the problems, but in absence of follow-through, people don't know what's going on. So taking that time to communicate out to your team, even if it's just a report of like, hey, I'm working on this problem, I haven't got to it, that constant stream of information, if you're not going there, it leaves people feeling unheard or that nothing is changing. And it's been a consistent problem that we've had where people don't feel like the feedback they're giving is being actioned on. And it's something I know we need to continue to improve on. Communication. So I know this is something that was very hard for me to understand with communication, but communication is what is understood, not what is said. Like, I said the thing. Like, come on, it was super clear. It's not necessarily. What you say is how you understand it, but you need to confirm that the person you're talking to actually heard it and understood it the way you meant it. This is the power of mirroring. So anybody else who's been through years of therapy, you do a lot of mirroring. I use this constantly, probably to the point of annoyance with some people, because it's my only way to know for sure that I have understood what people have communicated to me, and it's the only way for me to know that they have understood what I have communicated to them. So this is asking somebody to repeat back what we just talked about. This is repeating back to others what we just talked about. Particularly for critical conversations, very important step. Without this, you're guessing. You're just guessing that they understood the information. The other part of it is the importance of repetition. People very rarely retain things that you have talked about once. My general rule is you're going to need to talk about something roughly 7 times for it to truly sink and retain long term. Some of this is about forming those committed pathways. You've got to ingrain those things in, particularly when you're looking for change. So don't have a conversation once and think you've solved the problem. Keep going back at it, and often from different angles if you can, to really hone it in. Another thing that we really struggled with during remote work, hybrid work, and lockdown were public channels of information. So for anyone else with Slack, direct messages, very common. And we found about 60% of all communication was happening in DMs. Unfortunately, when it happens in a DM, only those people have access to it. And if they leave, if they get hit by a bus, it's gone forever. So some of the things we started doing is if a conversation was happening in DMs and it became at all serious and could be public, turn it into a public channel, take it out into the public space, force those things into a place where they can be retained and shared. And I know Slack can be a nightmare to go back and archive information in, but at least there's a chance. In DMs, it won't be there. The other side of it is just as an individual, ask yourself, is this something that anyone else would benefit from? Is this something that's not privileged that I can do public? If so, hit a public channel with the information. Other people will benefit from it. The other thing that we get with growth, particularly in a remote world, because we've got people in Singapore, we've got people in Seattle, we've got people in Arizona, we've got people in Sydney and Belmont and Brisbane, all over the planet. It gets hard to know how to work with each other. And a user guide can be something that really eases that path to getting to the point where you're working together quickly. So this is something like for me, I'll always let people know with my user guide that if you email me, I am likely to miss it. I check my emails about 3 times a week, usually in the morning, and I'm scanning through many, many emails for critical ones. There's a chance I'm going to miss it. If there's an email that you actually absolutely need from me, send me a DM that you've emailed me and I will go get to it. Best way to get in touch with me is with a DM. Second best way is to @ me in a channel. And if you really need me urgently, send me a text. But simple things like that just clarify how communication is going to work. If you can standardize that across that team, you can speed along that integration of the team in just communicating clearly. Wow, my whole career, the danger of projecting knowledge rather than radiating knowledge. It is a very common problem for leaders to, once they have learned something, to project onto their team that that knowledge is shared. Because I know it, everyone else clearly knows it. I've seen this at giant studios, I've seen this at small studios. Overcoming that internal projection of knowledge because I understand it and turning that into radiated knowledge is really important for making sure that the team understands the why. And Harry and I have a talk this afternoon to go more into why matters. But one of the things I do at the end of the day as I'm going through my notes is I look at the things that I have learned on the day, and it's like, which of these things are things I need to radiate? I need to do this daily, or else it gets archived into my brain and won't get there. But making sure that key pieces of information make it out, very important. Last part, and this is going to be different everywhere, but I know I really value shared language and shortcuts. So sometimes this is terrifying in terms of acronyms. I know when I showed up at Immutable, I knew nothing about blockchain. And in every meeting, I'm raising hands like, what the heck is that acronym? So again, this is where sort of user guides and glossaries can be really helpful to carry people up. But beyond that, with shared language, some of it comes down to how we clearly communicate to each other what we're talking about. An example I would give is at Immutable, we've been using insights as sort of a personality communication style tool. And out of all the individual analysis, like learning how my coworkers like to communicate, it's useful. But the thing I got most out of it is in insights, you have colors. So you've got red. Red's your sort of typical executive, very much do-do-do. Blue. Blue are people who are very analytical. They love numbers. They're going to dive in. Green, you've got people like me who are deeply empathetic. They care about feelings. They're going to talk through feelings. They're going to say, it doesn't feel right. And then you've got yellow, who are storytellers. One of the things that I found useful about it, beyond the analysis, which I would give and take, is just the shared language. When my boss comes to me and he goes, Clay, I need you to be really blue on this. When you're preparing this for the board, go blue. It means I need to go get data together. When he's like, I need green clay, it means, okay, I get to be empathetic. I need red clay. I'm like, okay, it's time for me to go be hard. So useful for me in terms of clear conversations of like what he needs from me. Getting some of those shared language pieces together can speed things along quite a bit. Not saying you have to use insights, but whatever it is for you. Connection, a relationship in which a person or thing is linked or associated with something else. This is another thing that is really challenging in a hybrid world. I'm sure we've all experienced it with people working overseas that perhaps we've only ever seen through a screen. Connection in a, yeah, or you get to see them for the first time. And when you get to see people for the first time, like, it's amazing, isn't it? Like, it's different. It is wholly different from just connecting through a screen. Connection is really hard. So how do we help facilitate that? One of the ways that we've seen is we have to have overlap. So it doesn't necessarily matter that somebody is living in a different time zone. We've got to have the overlap hours where we can get together and we can collaborate. It also means that for us, if one person is going to be on a call, we typically have everybody connect in. We've started to break that a little because our video conferencing at our office is pretty good. But even so, it's still more challenging when half the people are in a room, the other people are remote. The other part about this is to have connection, you also often have to have time alone. So time in your zone where you can have days where you're working normal hours in your time zone. These are potentially focus days where you're going and working on your individual work. Free up meetings can be very effective. Asynchronous comms and patience. Because people are in different time zones, this is, again, that expectation that because I've sent something on Slack that I'm going to get something back immediately. Giving people space can help them get together because you can compartmentalize between your normal work and your work from home. I know it's been a consistent challenge for me during remote work to detach at the end of the day. That also goes back to the running. That's my moment at the end of the day. I go for a run with my son. I am now in dad mode. I am no longer in game director mode. And it's really key for me if I'm going to rejuvenate to keep that separation. All of these little bits of individual time then lead to like, okay, so how do we connect? FaceTime is critically important, and one of the things that we do is find time for teams to get together in person. Find times for teams to get together over food, ideally. Food is a great facilitator for shared connection. The other side of it is rituals. So I know for anybody who's done Scrum, stand-ups can be an absolute pain in the butt. But if you can get together and have that moment in the day where you can see your coworkers, talk things through, provides a little bit of that connection. If people aren't joining those, and we did have issues with this, they can further and further drift away. Getting people in, even if it's annoying, so that they have a little bit of face time. This is, again, where that body doubling can be really effective. Get two people in a room together to work on a problem together, rather than isolation when you're working on something complex. And then for me, being very green, relationships. So yes, it's work, but taking the time to build relationships with your team members. Yes, they are work relationships. Sometimes they evolve into personal relationships as well. But when things get hard, those relationships are, I know what I fall back on to get through. That people know that I care, that people know that I'm there for them. And it makes people, again, feel connected. All right, how are we doing on time? I need to speed up. Retaining talent, keeping your team intact. So there's also been some good talks here about talent and how there is a global war for talent in all sorts of fields. We obviously all want to retain talent. This has been one of my superpowers in general. Typically on my teams, my retention metrics are very, very good. First part about that, though, is knowing when to let go. So I'm going to go all the way back to that brilliant jerk problem. There are times when if you want to retain the majority of your team, you need to let people go. And I think we can all acknowledge that we have people on our teams that are disconnecting. They are no longer engaged with their work. They aren't showing up like they used to. And this is where radical candor, again, can make a huge impact on your ability to retain talent. Because sometimes you need to call those people out in, again, you can do it kindly, but in a very pragmatic way. Be like, hey, I've noticed you're disconnected. Is Immutable serving you now? Is this where you want to be? Are you happy in your career? Do you need a change? And helping people leave when the answer to those is like, no, it's not serving me anymore to be here. No, I'm not happy. Like, I don't have a role here that I'm really engaged with. Helping people move on cleanly can actually help you retain the rest of the team because those people do form an epicenter of just sadness and discontent, and the people around them are going to be impacted by that. So as counterintuitive as it is, to retain people, sometimes you need to let them go. The other way to retain is people need to feel heard. And again, this is something that seems so simple, but one of the common problems with people who are leaving is they no longer feel heard. They no longer feel respected. They no longer feel like they have a place. They're disengaged. Leading through listening, even for somebody like me who's very outgoing, it's taking that time to shut up, be in a meeting, and just listen. Process what's going on. And this is also where a common thing that I do is I might take 15 minutes where I'm not saying anything in a meeting, and then I mirror back. And I've not been engaging by talking, but here are all the things I've gotten out of it. These key points, these key takeaways. Did I get that correct? Yes, I got that correct. Okay. I think based off everything we've said, this is where we're going. Do these actions make sense? At the end of the day, then, I'm just organizing the data. I'm not coming up with the ideas. I'm just carrying it along. And leading through letting other people pull the agenda and just collating, again, it helps people feel heard. It helps them feel engaged. The other side of this is the importance of engagement, growth, and development. So this one is challenging because at the end of the day, we need our employees to solve problems for us. Be they code, be they art, be they production, product management, marketing. They're there to solve a business need. Unfortunately, when you're doing that for a long period of time consistently, discontent can sit in if you're stagnating. If I have been doing the same thing over and over again, even if I'm really good at it, particularly if I'm neurodivergent, I'm going to get bored, and I'm going to want to move on to that next thing. So making sure that you're taking that time to engage with your people, see how they're growing, what do they need? Do they need support? Is it time to move to another role? Is it time to move to another department? I mean, for me, the only reason I spent my first 15 years at Turbine is I got to bounce around all over the company. And the company let me do that. It let me discover new things and explore. So giving people the opportunity to move, the rule for me was always, I'm always working to make myself obsolete. I'm training other people, I'm setting up systems so I'm not needed anymore so I can move on. And that's often how I try and interact with people who are looking to do that. It's like, okay, our next job is to make you obsolete, either through hiring, through training, through automation, whatever, so that we can move you on to that next thing. It's one of the easiest things to lose. In all of the chaos of game development, and man, game development is chaos, particularly when you're working on games as a service, it never stops. It's always live. This often gets lost, but if you can hold on to that, you're doing a much better job at retaining your team. The other thing that I've seen a lot is teams wanting all seniors. It's like, we want all principal and senior engineers. We want the best of the best, and that means we're going to move the fastest. And I really don't think that's true. The way that I like to describe it is, in any job, there is scut work. There is work that just has to be done, that isn't hard, that is rote, that is mechanical. But guess what? It still has to get done. Juniors are great at that, because guess what? They've never done it before. It's brand new for them. The seniors get to take these tasks that they don't want to be doing anymore. They can move it off to the juniors. They can help them develop, and they can go work on the hard problems. But if all you have are senior and principal people in your business, it means they're doing work that is well below them. Take the time to go find great juniors who have tons of talent, potential, bring them onto the team, and I think almost certainly you will see your seniors excel. So go for balance. Have people throughout. Let those juniors progress. Let those senior people train and teach. Because until you've taught something, you really don't know that you know it. The other part of this is interns can be a great balance into everything. Interns, they're often still in school. They can come in, they can learn something, they can grow. The hardest part about it that I've seen time and time again is always wanting to keep the interns. Then you can't get new interns. At some point, if you're keeping all your interns, there's no more room. Having internship programs where people come in, they succeed, they excel, and they move on, that move on part is really, really hard, particularly if you've made connections to people, particularly if you enjoy them. But one of the key features that I found with internship programs is having that cycle, and having that cycle of people who are young, fresh, energized, and engaged helps the team as a whole. One of the ways I put it is like that youthful excitement is infectious on those of us who are old and jaded in the business. All right, I think we are generally there. Got a couple of minutes left for questions. I will give up the mic, but thank you so much.